The moment I heard sirens screaming up my driveway, I knew my neighbor Brenda had finally lost her mind. I was standing in my garage, still wearing my snow gear and pulling off my helmet after what should have been a perfectly innocent afternoon ride on my snowmobile through my own backyard. The property in question sat in the rural outskirts of Duluth, Minnesota, where January meant 2 feet of fresh powder and temperatures that kept it around all winter long. For most people out here, snowmobiling was as normal as mowing the lawn in summer. But apparently not for Brenda Davidson, president of the Northwoods Estate Homeowners Association, who had made it her personal mission to make my life miserable since I moved in 6 months ago. 2 squad cars pulled up in front of my house, lights flashing red and blue against the white snowbanks. I walked out to meet them, confused as hell about what could possibly warrant this response. A tall officer with a thick mustache stepped out first, his hand resting casually on his belt. "Are you Franklin Morrison?" he asked, his breath creating small clouds in the frigid air. "That's me." "What's going on, officer?" "We received a call about reckless endangerment, trespassing, and destruction of property. The caller said you were operating a snowmobile in a dangerous manner and damaged their fence." I blinked at him, processing this absurdity. My snowmobile. I was riding through my own backyard. It's my property. The second officer, younger with bright red cheeks from the cold, pulled out a notepad. "The complaint came from a Mrs. Davidson. She says you deliberately drove through her fence and onto HOA common property. Of course it was Brenda. This woman had been on my case since day one, sending me violation notices for everything from parking my truck at the wrong angle in my driveway to having my garbage cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours. The HOA in this neighborhood was supposed to be minimal, just handling snow removal on the main roads and maintaining a small community park. But Brenda treated it like her personal fiefdom. Officers, I can assure you I was nowhere near any HOA property. I own 5 acres here and I was riding through my backyard. If there's a fence involved, it's not mine." The mustached officer nodded slowly. "Would you mind showing us exactly where you were riding?" "Not at all. Follow me." I led them around the side of my house, past my detached garage where my snowmobile was now parked. The backyard stretched out before us, a pristine white expanse broken only by the tracks from my ride. My property line extended all the way back to a tree line about 300 yards behind the house, with open space on either side. That's when I saw it. On the western edge of my property, there was indeed a section of wooden fence lying partially collapsed in the snow. And standing next to it, wrapped in a puffy purple coat that made her look like an angry grape, was Brenda Davidson. 2 other women flanked her, members of the HOA board I recognized from the passive-aggressive notes they loved to leave on my door. "There he is!" Brenda shrieked, pointing at me with a gloved finger. "Officers, arrest that man. He deliberately destroyed HOA property and endangered everyone in this neighborhood with his reckless behavior." The mustached officer held up a hand. "Madam, please calm down. We're investigating the situation." "Investigating? There's nothing to investigate. I saw him with my own eyes flying through here on that death machine completely out of control. He crashed right through our fence." I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. "Brenda, I didn't crash through anything. I was riding through my own property, staying well within my boundaries. If your fence is damaged, it's because you built it on my land." Her face turned a shade of red that clashed terribly with her purple coat. "How dare you? That fence has been there for 8 years. It marks the boundary of the HOA common area. Then the HOA made a mistake 8 years ago because it's on my property." The younger officer looked between us. Do either of you have documentation showing the property lines? I do, actually. When I bought this place last summer, I had a survey done before closing. The paperwork is in my house. Give me 5 minutes. Brenda sputtered behind me as I walked back toward my front door. He's lying. Don't let him go fabricate evidence. I ignored her and went inside, grateful for the blast of warm air that greeted me. My house was a modest 3-bedroom ranch that I had gotten for a steal because the previous owner wanted out from under the HOA's thumb. At the time, I thought he was exaggerating about how bad it could be. I was learning quickly that he had undersold it. I found the survey documents in my filing cabinet, along with the property deed and the closing paperwork. Everything clearly showed my property lines, marked by a professional surveying company. I grabbed the whole folder and headed back outside. The scene in my backyard had grown. Now there were 4 additional people standing with Brenda, all of them looking equally outraged. The HOA board had assembled like some kind of suburban Avengers team, ready to defend their fence. I handed the survey documents to the mustached officer, whose name tag I could now see read Patterson. He studied them carefully, then walked toward the collapsed fence section. The younger officer, whose tag said Mills, followed with a measuring tape. According to these documents, Officer Patterson called out, the western property line should be approximately 40 feet past this fence location. Brenda's expression shifted from righteous anger to something resembling panic. That can't be right. Our records show this fence is on HOA property. Madam, do you have a recent survey to back that up? She hesitated. We have the original plat map from when the development was established. When was that? 1992. Officer Patterson exchanged a glance with Officer Mills. These survey documents are from 6 months ago and were conducted by a licensed surveyor. Unless you have something more recent that contradicts them, it appears Mr. Morrison is correct. This fence is on his property. The silence that followed was delicious. Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The other board members shuffled awkwardly in the snow. But that's impossible, one of them finally said, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who I knew as Richard from the HOA correspondence. We've maintained that fence for years. Maintaining something doesn't make it yours, I pointed out. If I started mowing part of your lawn every week, would that make it my property? Officer Patterson nodded. Mr. Morrison has a point. From what I can see here, there's no crime been committed. He was on his own property, and the fence was constructed without proper verification of the property line. Brenda looked like she was about to have a stroke. This is outrageous. He still destroyed HOA property. HOA property that was illegally placed on his land, Officer Mills added. Madam, if anything, the HOA could be liable for encroachment. I had to fight to keep the smile off my face. This was better than I could have hoped for. Not only had Brenda's attempt to get me arrested backfired spectacularly, but now she was the one in the wrong. Officer Patterson handed my documents back to me. Mr. Morrison, you're free to use your property as you see fit, within local noise ordinances and safety regulations. Madam, he turned to Brenda, I'd suggest you have the HOA conduct a proper survey before making any more accusations. Calling 911 with false claims is a serious matter. False claims. I saw what I saw. You saw a man on his own property. That's not a crime. Patterson's tone had shifted from patient to firm. We're going to clear out now. I suggest everyone here does the same before this turns into harassment. The officers walked back toward their cars, leaving me standing in my backyard with 5 furious HOA board members. Brenda looked like she wanted to say something else, but Richard put a hand on her arm and shook his head. They turned and trudged back through the snow toward their own properties, a defeated parade of suburban bureaucrats. I stood there for a moment, enjoying the victory, before heading back inside to warm up. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my buddy Jake, who lived about 10 miles away. "Dude, did I just see on the scanner that cops got called to your place?" he texted. "Yeah. HOA tried to have me arrested for snowmobiling in my own yard." "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. Turns out their fence is on my property. Cops told them to back off." "That's amazing." "Hey, we're hitting the trails tomorrow if you want to join. Supposed to be perfect conditions. I'll let you know. I have a feeling tomorrow is going to be interesting." I had no idea how right I was. The next morning started with a certified letter slipped into my door. I found it when I went out to start my truck, the envelope wedged into the door frame. The return address showed it was from the Northwoods Estate HOA, which was hilarious given that Brenda lived 3 houses down and could have just walked over. But I supposed certified mail made it feel more official. Inside was a formal notice of violation, citing me for destruction of community property and unauthorized modification of common areas. The letter demanded I pay for the fence repair within 30 days or face a lien on my property. I read it twice, laughing harder each time. They were actually trying to charge me for damage to a fence they had built on my land without permission. The audacity was almost impressive. I called my real estate attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Simmons who had handled my closing. She answered on the second ring. "Franklin, how's the new place treating you?" "Well, the HOA called the cops on me yesterday for snowmobiling in my backyard." There was a pause. "I'm sorry, what?" I explained the whole situation, from the collapsed fence to the survey documents to this morning's violation notice. Patricia listened without interrupting, though I could hear her typing notes. "Okay," she said when I finished. "First, don't pay anything or sign anything they send you. Second, I'm going to draft a response letter making it clear that they built on your property without permission and demanding they remove the fence entirely. Third, you might want to consider a counterclaim for the unauthorized use of your land. I'm not trying to start a war here. I just want to be left alone. I understand, but you need to establish boundaries now or they'll keep pushing. These HOA situations can escalate quickly if you don't shut them down early." "Fine. Do what you need to do. I'll have something drafted by end of day. In the meantime, document everything. Take photos of the fence location, keep all correspondence, note every interaction." I spent the rest of the morning doing exactly that. I took dozens of photos of the damaged fence from every angle, clearly showing it was well inside what my survey indicated was my property line. I photographed the survey stakes that were still in place from when the work was done in July. I even measured the distances myself and documented everything in a spreadsheet. Around noon, my doorbell rang. I expected Brenda or another board member, ready for round 2. Instead, I found a man in his 60s wearing a Carhartt jacket and a friendly smile. "Franklin Morrison?" he asked, extending his hand. "I'm Bill Thompson. I live over on Oak Ridge Drive, other side of the neighborhood." I shook his hand, confused but cautiously optimistic. "Nice to meet you. What can I do for you?" "I heard about what happened yesterday with Brenda and the fence. I wanted to come by and tell you that not everyone in this neighborhood supports the way she runs the HOA. "That's good to know. You want to come in? I just made coffee." "I'd appreciate that." We sat in my living room and Bill wrapped his hands around the mug I offered him. "I've lived here for 15 years, he said. "When I moved in, the HOA was barely a thing. We paid minimal dues, they plowed the roads, that was about it. But about 7 years ago, Brenda moved in and decided she needed to be in charge of everything. She got herself elected president and has been on a power trip ever since. Why doesn't anyone vote her out? She's got a core group of supporters who show up to every meeting and vote as a bloc. The rest of us just want to live our lives, so we don't always attend. Classic case of the loudest voices winning by default. I sipped my coffee, processing this. So what happened with that fence? Did she just decide to put it up one day? Bill nodded. Yeah, about 8 years ago, right before she became president. The HOA wanted to designate some common areas for community use, which wasn't a bad idea in theory. But instead of hiring a surveyor to properly mark boundaries, Brenda convinced the board at the time that they could save money by just estimating based on the old plat maps. They put up fences around what they thought was HOA property. Let me guess, they got it wrong in more places than just my lot. Probably. Your property is the only one where it's become an issue, mainly because the previous owner was too worn down to fight about it. He just avoided that part of his yard. Why did he sell? Bill's expression darkened. Brenda. She made his life hell over every little thing. His wife got sick, and he needed to focus on taking care of her, not fighting with the HOA over nonsense. So he sold at a loss and moved to a condo in Hermantown. That matched what the seller had hinted at during closing, though he had not gone into details. I felt a surge of anger on his behalf. That's terrible. It is. And it's not just him. 3 other families have sold in the past 5 years because of HOA harassment. Brenda's turned this neighborhood into her personal kingdom, and she retaliates against anyone who challenges her. How does she retaliate? Constant violation notices. Showing up unannounced to inspect your property. Calling the city inspector on you for made-up code violations. She once had someone's car towed from their own driveway because it was improperly parked according to some rule she invented. It's exhausting. I sat back, understanding the scope of what I was dealing with. This was not just a pushy neighbor. This was an organized campaign of harassment enabled by a small amount of official authority. So what do you think I should do? I asked. Bill set down his coffee mug and looked at me seriously. Fight back. Most people just give up because it's easier, but that only makes her worse. You've got clear documentation that you're in the right. Push back hard, establish your boundaries, and don't let her intimidate you. My attorney is already drafting a response letter. Good. And if you need people to back you up at HOA meetings, let me know. There are at least a dozen homeowners who are tired of her garbage. We just need someone willing to take point. We talked for another hour, and Bill filled me in on all the neighborhood dynamics I had missed as a newcomer. By the time he left, I had a much clearer picture of what I was up against. This was not going to be resolved with one police visit and a stern letter. Brenda had invested too much of her identity in being the HOA enforcer to back down easily. That evening, Patricia emailed me the response letter she had drafted. It was beautifully brutal, laying out in precise legal language that the fence was an encroachment on my property, that I had not given permission for its construction, and that the HOA was liable for its removal and any damages caused by the encroachment. She also included a formal demand that the HOA cease and desist from any further harassment, including violation notices for activities conducted on my own property. Send it certified mail, return receipt requested, she wrote in her email. And be prepared for them to escalate before they back down. I printed the letter, signed it, and drove to the post office in downtown Duluth the next morning. The clerk processed the certified mail, and I got my receipt showing it would be delivered directly to the HOA's registered agent, which according to the neighborhood bylaws was Brenda herself. For 2 days, nothing happened. I went about my normal routine, working from home in my office that looked out over that pristine white backyard. I kept watching for some kind of reaction, but my street stayed quiet. Then on the third day, all hell broke loose. I woke up to find a notice stapled to my front door. Not slipped into the door frame this time, but actually stapled into the wood. The notice declared that I was in violation of HOA regulations for having unauthorized structures on my property. It listed my garage, my shed, my deck, and even my mailbox as structures that had not been approved by the Architectural Review Committee. The thing was, all of those structures had been there when I bought the house. They were decades old. And more importantly, the HOA bylaws that I had reviewed before purchasing explicitly grandfathered in any structures that existed before 2010. This was pure retaliation, and it was sloppy. Brenda was so angry that she had gotten careless. I took photos of the notice, careful to capture the staple damage to my door. Then I called Patricia. "They're panicking," she said after I explained. "This is actually good for us. They're creating a clear pattern of harassment that we can document. Don't respond directly to the notice." "Let me handle it. They damaged my door. Even better. That's destruction of property. File a police report." "You think I should involve the cops again?" "Absolutely. You need documentation that this is ongoing harassment, not a one-time dispute. Trust me on this." I called the non-emergency police line and explained the situation. The dispatcher said she would send an officer by to take a report. An hour later, Officer Mills from the previous incident pulled up. "Mr. Morrison," he said with a slight smile as I opened the door, "we meet again. Sorry to bother you guys again." "No bother." The dispatcher filled me in. "Let's see what we've got." I showed him the notice stapled to my door and explained the background. He took photos and notes, then asked if I had received any other harassment since the fence incident. I showed him the previous violation notice about the fence repair. "This is clearly retaliatory," he said. "And stapling something to your door caused property damage. It's minor, but it's still vandalism. Do you want to press charges?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say yes, to make Brenda face real consequences for her behavior, but another part worried about escalating things even further. What would happen if I did? We'd issue a citation for criminal mischief. Given that it's minor damage, she'd probably pay a fine and that would be it, but it would create an official record. "Let me think about it. Can I decide later?" "Sure. You've got the report number. If you want to pursue charges, just call and reference it. The photos and documentation will be in the system." After Officer Mills left, I sat in my living room trying to figure out my next move. I had lived in this house for 6 months and barely gotten to enjoy it because I was constantly dealing with HOA nonsense. This was not what I signed up for when I moved to Minnesota for a fresh start. My phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize with a local area code. "Hello, is this Franklin Morrison?" The voice was male, professional, unfamiliar. "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is David Chen. I'm an attorney representing the Northwoods Estate Homeowners Association. I'm calling regarding the dispute over the fence on your property." I sat up straighter. So the HOA had lawyered up. "Okay. I understand there's been some conflict regarding property boundaries. My clients are willing to discuss a reasonable resolution that benefits both parties. Your clients built a fence on my property without permission. I'm not sure what there is to discuss. Mr. Morrison, I'm sure we can avoid turning this into an expensive legal battle. Perhaps the HOA could maintain the fence and you could grant an easement for that section of property. Why would I give up part of my land because your client screwed up? It's not about giving up land. It's about being a good neighbor and finding a compromise." I almost laughed. A compromise would be them removing their fence from my property and apologizing for calling the cops on me for using my own yard. That's the compromise. There was a pause. I see. Well, if you're unwilling to discuss this reasonably, my clients may have no choice but to pursue legal action. For what? I haven't done anything wrong. There's the matter of the destroyed fence. Regardless of the property line dispute, you did damage HOA property. Your clients put their property on my land. I'm not responsible for damage to something that should not have been there in the first place. And before you threaten legal action again, you should know that my attorney has already sent your clients a cease and desist letter regarding their harassment, and I just filed a police report about criminal mischief. So if you want to pursue this, be my guest. I've got documentation of everything. Another pause, longer this time. I'll relay your position to my clients, but I'd encourage you to reconsider. These disputes can get very ugly. They already are ugly. Your clients made them that way. He hung up without saying goodbye. I immediately called Patricia and filled her in. Good, she said. You didn't commit to anything, and you made it clear you're not backing down. Now they have to decide if they want to spend money fighting a battle they'll lose. Do you think they'll actually sue? Doubtful. They'd have to admit in court that they built on your property without permission. No attorney worth their fee would advise that. This call was probably an intimidation tactic to see if you'd fold. What's our next move? We wait. The ball is in their court. In the meantime, I'm going to do some research on the HOA's bylaws and governance structure. If they're harassing multiple homeowners, there might be grounds for a larger action. That weekend, I decided to take Jake up on his offer to go snowmobiling. I needed to blow off steam and remember why I had moved to Minnesota in the first place. The state had some of the best snowmobiling trails in the country, and I had barely gotten to enjoy them. We met at a trail head north of Duluth early Saturday morning. The temperature was a brutal -15 degrees, but the sun was bright and the snow was perfect. Jake had brought 2 of his buddies, Greg and Tom, and we spent the day tearing through the woods on miles of groomed trails. It was exactly what I needed. Out there, with the engine roaring and the scenery blurring past, the HOA drama felt distant and insignificant. This was freedom. This was why I had bought a place with acreage and space. We stopped for lunch at a warming house along the trail, a small heated shelter stocked with vending machines and benches. Greg pulled off his helmet and shook out his hair. Jake says you're having HOA trouble, he said. That's putting it mildly. Man, that's why I'll never live in one of those neighborhoods. Too many rules, too many busybodies. Tom laughed. Yeah, Greg values his right to let his lawn turn into a jungle and park broken cars in his driveway. Hey, it's my property, I'll do what I want. We joked around for a while, but the conversation got me thinking. The whole point of owning property was having autonomy over your own space. The HOA model made sense for condos and townhouses where you shared structures, but for single-family homes on individual lots. It always felt like giving up freedom for the illusion of neighborhood harmony. When I got home that evening, exhausted and happy, I found another notice on my door. This one was about my truck, claiming it was a commercial vehicle that violated the HOA's restrictions on business use of residential properties. My truck was a standard Ford F-150. The only thing remotely commercial about it was that I occasionally hauled stuff in the bed. Plenty of people in the neighborhood had similar trucks. I took a photo and texted it to Patricia. They're really reaching now, I wrote. She responded almost immediately. Good. Let them keep digging. Every notice they send is more evidence of harassment. Monday morning brought a new development. I got an email from the City of Duluth's Code Enforcement Office. informing me that they had received a complaint about my property and would be conducting an inspection on Wednesday morning. The complaint alleged multiple code violations, including improper storage of a recreational vehicle, unpermitted structures, and potential zoning violations. It was clearly Brenda's doing, exactly the retaliation Bill had warned me about. I forwarded the email to Patricia and called the code enforcement office. The inspector I spoke with, a patient-sounding man named Ron, assured me that this was routine and nothing to worry about if my property was in compliance. "Between you and me," he said quietly, "we get a lot of complaints from HOAs that turn out to be nothing, but we have to investigate everyone. I'll come by Wednesday at 10, take a quick look around, and assuming everything is fine, you'll get a letter saying so." The complaint mentioned my snowmobile. I keep it in my garage. That's fine. Storage of recreational vehicles in enclosed structures is allowed. It's only a violation if you're parking it in your driveway or front yard permanently. Wednesday morning arrived cold and clear. Ron from Code Enforcement showed up right at 10, clipboard in hand. He was a heavy-set guy in his 50s with a kind face and the patient demeanor of someone who dealt with nonsense complaints regularly. I walked him around the property, showing him the garage where my snowmobile was stored, the shed that held lawn equipment, the deck attached to the house. Everything had been built decades ago by previous owners and was clearly weathered but well maintained. "Any permits on file for these structures?" Ron asked. The deck and garage both had permits pulled when they were built in 1998. The shed is small enough that it didn't require one. All of that should be in your records. He made notes on his clipboard. "And this fence situation I'm seeing in the complaint. That's HOA property that was built on my land without my permission. I have a recent survey showing the property lines if you want to see it." "No need. That's a civil matter between you and the HOA, not a code issue." "Okay, Mr. Morrison, everything looks fine here. You'll get a letter in a few days confirming no violations were found." "What happens with the person who filed the false complaint?" Ron sighed. "Technically, it's not illegal to file a complaint that turns out to be unfounded. We can only take action if there's a pattern of harassment through false reports. How many complaints have been filed on your property?" "This is the first one with the city, but the HOA president has been harassing me for months." "I'd suggest documenting everything and talking to a lawyer if it continues. The city can't stop HOA disputes, but we also won't be used as a weapon in them. If I get another complaint from the same source that turns out to be bogus, I'll note that in the file." After Ron left, I felt a small sense of vindication. Another one of Brenda's attacks had failed, but I also felt exhausted. This was consuming so much time and energy that should have been going towards settling into my new home and my new life. I made lunch and was eating at my kitchen table when I saw movement outside my window. Brenda was walking across my backyard toward the collapsed section of fence. She had someone with her, a man in a bright yellow safety vest carrying surveying equipment. I grabbed my coat and headed outside. "Can I help you?" I called out as I approached. Brenda turned, her expression full of fake sweetness. "Oh, Franklin, we're just having our own survey done to verify the property lines. I'm sure it's all just a misunderstanding." The surveyor, a young guy who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, nodded nervously. "Sir, I'm with Miller Surveying. The HOA hired us to mark the boundaries of their common areas. Do you have permission to be on my property?" I asked Brenda directly. "This is HOA common area," she said firmly. "No, it's not. I have a survey from 6 months ago proving this is my land. You're trespassing." The surveyor held up his hands. "Look, I don't want to be in the middle of a dispute. "Madam, if the property owner is objecting to our presence, I can't proceed without his permission or a court order." Brenda's fake sweetness evaporated. "We hired you to do a job, and I'm happy to survey the areas where there's no dispute about access. But if Mr. Morrison has a recent survey showing this is his property and he's refusing entry, my hands are tied." "This is ridiculous," Brenda snapped. She pulled out her phone and started jabbing at the screen. I turned to the surveyor. "You're welcome to look at my survey documents if that helps. They're from Northland Surveying, done last July. Northland is a good firm. If they did the work, I'd trust their results. But I still need to complete the job the HOA hired me for." He looked at Brenda. "Madam, maybe we should start with the other common areas and revisit this section once the property line dispute is resolved." She glared at both of us, then turned and stalked back toward the street. The surveyor gave me an apologetic look and followed her. I stood in my backyard, shaking my head. Brenda was not going to give up. She was going to keep pushing and pushing until something broke. I just had to make sure it was not me. That evening, Bill Thompson called me. "Hey Franklin, I'm organizing a group of homeowners who are fed up with the HOA's behavior. We're meeting tomorrow night at my place to discuss options. You interested?" "Definitely." "What time?" 7 o'clock. "It'll be informal. Just a chance to compare notes and figure out if there's anything we can do collectively." I showed up at Bill's house on Oak Ridge Drive promptly at 7. His place was similar to mine, a ranch-style home with a large yard and mature trees. Inside, I found about 15 other homeowners gathered in his living room, sitting on couches and chairs pulled in from other rooms. Bill made introductions. I recognized a few faces from around the neighborhood, but most were strangers. They all had one thing in common, though. They looked tired and frustrated. "Thanks for coming, everyone," Bill started. "I know we're all busy, so I'll keep this brief. We're here because the HOA has become a source of stress instead of a benefit to the neighborhood. I thought it would be helpful to share experiences and see if there are common patterns." The stories that emerged over the next hour were startling in their similarity. Nearly everyone had received violation notices for trivial or made-up infractions. Several had been reported to the city for false code violations. One couple had been fined repeatedly for having a dog that barked, even though they did not own a dog. Another family had their car towed from their own driveway while they were on vacation. "I wanted to paint my front door blue," said a woman named Susan. "The HOA bylaws don't say anything about door colors, but Brenda showed up at my house and told me I couldn't do it because it wasn't in keeping with neighborhood aesthetics. I checked the bylaws myself. There's nothing about it. She's just making up rules." "Same thing happened to me with my mailbox," added a man named Pete. "She said it was the wrong style. I showed her the section of the bylaws that said mailboxes just had to be in good repair, and she told me I was being difficult." As I listened, a picture emerged of systematic abuse of HOA authority. Brenda had learned that most people would comply with her demands rather than fight, even when those demands had no legal basis. And for the few who did push back, she had an arsenal of retaliation tactics to make their lives miserable until they either gave up or moved away. "So what can we do?" asked Susan. "I mean, she's the president. She runs the board meetings. Her friends vote however she wants." Bill leaned forward. "Actually, there might be options. I did some research on the bylaws. Any homeowner can call for a special meeting to vote on HOA matters, including board elections. We just need 20% of homeowners to sign a petition requesting it." "There are 70 homes in this neighborhood," Pete calculated, "so we'd need 14 signatures. We've got 15 people in this room right now," I pointed out. Exactly, Bill said. If we call a special meeting and get enough people to show up, we could vote Brenda out and elect a new board that actually follows the rules. A woman in the back spoke up. Do you really think people will come? Most of the neighborhood just keeps their heads down. Maybe, Bill acknowledged. But we won't know unless we try. And even if we don't get enough support to change the board, at minimum, we'll send a message that not everyone is okay with how things are being run. We spent the next hour drafting a petition and planning logistics. Bill volunteered to circulate the petition around the neighborhood. I offered to help draft a slate of new board candidates and a platform focused on minimal governance and following the actual bylaws. As people were leaving, Susan pulled me aside. I heard about what happened with your fence. Just wanted to say I'm glad someone is finally standing up to her. I'm not trying to be a hero, I just want to use my own property in peace. That's exactly what we all want, but nobody has been willing to fight for it. Maybe you'll have better luck. Over the next 2 weeks, Bill collected signatures on the petition. The response was better than expected. By the time we filed it with the HOA, we had signatures from 32 homeowners requesting a special meeting to vote on board leadership. According to the bylaws, the current board had to schedule the meeting within 30 days of receiving a valid petition. Brenda tried to claim the petition was invalid for various technical reasons, but Bill had been meticulous in following the procedures. She had no choice but to schedule it. The meeting was set for a Wednesday evening at the community center attached to the small neighborhood park. In the meantime, our group worked on outreach, knocking on doors and explaining why the meeting mattered. We heard more horror stories about HOA overreach and met more homeowners who had been quietly suffering under Brenda's regime. We also heard from her supporters, a core group of about a dozen people who seemed to genuinely believe that strict enforcement of rules, whether real or imagined, was necessary to protect property values. They saw Brenda as a guardian of neighborhood standards, not a bully on a power trip. 2 days before the meeting, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a woman's voice said, "Is this Franklin Morrison?" "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is Jennifer Park. I'm a reporter with the Duluth News-Tribune. I'm working on a story about HOA disputes in suburban developments, and your name came up. Would you be willing to talk to me?" I hesitated. The last thing I wanted was to turn this into a media circus. "How did you get my name?" "I've been investigating complaints filed with the City Code Enforcement Office. I noticed a pattern of complaints originating from HOA presidents that turned out to be unfounded. Your situation was one of them. I also heard about the special meeting coming up. I don't know if I'm the right person to talk to. Mr. Morrison, I'm not looking to create drama. I'm investigating what appears to be a pattern of HOA abuse across multiple developments in the region. Your neighborhood situation is part of a larger trend. People deserve to know this is happening." She had a point, and maybe public attention would pressure the HOA to back off. "Okay, I'll talk to you, but I want to see the article before it runs." "I can't promise that, but I can promise to represent your perspective fairly. Can we meet tomorrow?" We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in downtown Duluth the next afternoon. Jennifer turned out to be a woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and a notebook full of questions. We talked for over an hour. I explained the fence situation, the harassment, the violation notices, all of it. She took detailed notes and asked pointed questions about the HOA's bylaws and governance structure. "This is helpful," she said when we finished. "I'm talking to several other homeowners in your neighborhood too, and to residents of other developments with similar issues. The story should run early next week. Will that cause problems? Probably. But sometimes sunlight is the best disinfectant. If HOA boards know people are paying attention and documenting their behavior, they're more likely to follow the rules. The night of the special meeting arrived. I showed up at the community center half an hour early to help Bill set up chairs. We were expecting maybe 40 or 50 people, which would be a good turnout for neighborhood politics. By 7 o'clock, when the meeting was scheduled to start, there were over 90 people crammed into the space. Word had spread, and apparently a lot of homeowners were tired of keeping quiet. Brenda sat at a table at the front of the room with the other current board members. Richard, a woman named Margaret, and a younger guy named Tyler. They looked nervous, whispering among themselves as the room filled up. Bill called the meeting to order at 7 sharp. Thank you all for coming. As you know, this special meeting was called to address concerns about HOA governance and to vote on board leadership. We're going to follow proper procedure, which means we'll start with a reading of the petition that triggered this meeting. He read the petition aloud, which stated that the undersigned homeowners had lost confidence in the current board's leadership and requested an immediate election to replace them. There was scattered applause when he finished. Brenda stood up. "If I may address the assembly," she said in a tone that suggested she was not actually asking permission. "I think there's been a lot of misunderstanding about the board's role and responsibilities. We have worked hard to maintain property values and neighborhood standards. If some people disagree with our decisions, that's unfortunate, but we were elected to lead, and we have to make tough choices sometimes. Like building fences on people's property without permission," someone called out from the back. Brenda's face flushed. "That fence has been there for years. The previous property owner never complained." I stood up. "The previous owner also sold his house and left because of HOA harassment, and I have a survey proving the fence is on my land. You can't just take someone's property and claim it because nobody stopped you before." "You destroyed HOA property," Brenda shot back. "I used my own property. If your fence got damaged, that's because it should not have been there in the first place." The room erupted in crosstalk. Bill banged a gavel to restore order. "This is exactly why we need new leadership. The current board has lost sight of what an HOA is supposed to do. We're not here to control people or manufacture violations. We're here to maintain common areas and handle shared expenses. That's it. We also protect property values," Richard said. "If we just let everyone do whatever they want, this neighborhood will fall apart." Susan stood up. "Nobody is talking about letting the neighborhood fall apart. We're talking about following the actual bylaws instead of made-up rules. I wanted to paint my door blue, which the bylaws allow, and I got harassed for it. That's not protecting property values. That's a power trip." More voices joined in, sharing their own stories. The meeting devolved into a town hall-style airing of grievances. Brenda tried repeatedly to regain control, but the anger in the room was too strong. People were done being quiet. Finally, Bill called for order again. "All right, we need to follow procedure. The petition called for an election. I'm going to propose a slate of candidates for a new board, and then we'll open the floor for nominations. After that, we'll vote." He read the names of 5 people who had volunteered to run: himself, Susan, Pete, me, and a woman named Gloria who had lived in the neighborhood for 20 years. Brenda immediately objected. "This is railroading. You're trying to stack the board with your friends. Anyone can nominate candidates," Bill said calmly. "Do you want to nominate yourself or anyone else?" She did. She nominated herself, Richard, Margaret, and Tyler for re-election. A few of her supporters nominated others. In the end, there were 12 candidates for 5 board positions. The voting took almost an hour. Every homeowner was allowed 1 vote per position, and we counted them by hand to ensure accuracy. When the results were tallied, the new board was Bill, Susan, Pete, Gloria, and me. Brenda and her entire slate had lost. The room erupted in applause. Brenda sat frozen at the front table, her face pale. She looked genuinely shocked that the neighborhood had rejected her. "This is invalid," she said loudly. "We'll be consulting with our attorney." "The vote was conducted according to the bylaws you've been citing for years," Bill said. "But if you want to challenge it, that's your right. In the meantime, the new board is officially in charge as of this moment." Brenda gathered her things and walked out without another word, her supporters following behind her. The rest of the meeting was almost celebratory. We discussed immediate priorities for the new board, reviewing all pending violation notices, conducting an audit of HOA finances, and establishing clear guidelines for enforcement that actually matched the bylaws. I drove home that night feeling something I had not felt in months: hope. Maybe this nightmare was actually ending. The Duluth News-Tribune ran Jennifer Park's story 3 days later. It was a front-page article in the local section, headlined "HOA Horror Stories: When Community Boards Become Neighborhood Tyrants." My situation was featured prominently, along with several other cases from around the region. The article detailed Brenda's behavior, the fence dispute, the harassment campaign, and the special meeting that had removed her from power. It also included interviews with homeowners from other developments who described similar patterns of abuse. The story went viral locally. By that afternoon, it had been picked up by regional news stations and was trending on social media. I got calls from 3 different TV stations asking for interviews, which I declined. I had said what I needed to say. Now I just wanted to move on. The new board held its first official meeting a week later. We started by reviewing the HOA's finances, which turned out to be messier than expected. Brenda had been authorizing expenses without board approval, including thousands of dollars for her attorney to send threatening letters to homeowners. There were also questionable charges for administrative costs that seemed to mostly involve things she had purchased for herself. "This is potential embezzlement," Gloria said, looking at the spreadsheets. "We need to get an accountant to do a proper audit." We voted unanimously to hire an independent auditor. We also voted to rescind every violation notice issued in the past year and establish a new review process for any future notices that required documentation and board approval. The biggest decision was what to do about the fence on my property. Legally, I had every right to demand its removal. But after talking it through with the board, I proposed a compromise. The HOA would formally acknowledge that the fence was on my property, remove it at their expense, and issue a written apology. In exchange, I would not pursue any claims for damages from the encroachment. The board agreed, and the fence was removed 2 weeks later. Standing in my backyard watching a work crew pull up the posts, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The physical reminder of the conflict was finally gone. Brenda stayed quiet for about a month. Then she struck back in the pettiest way possible. She filed a lawsuit against me personally, claiming defamation for statements I made to the newspaper and intentional infliction of emotional distress for the snowmobile incident. Patricia called me the day she received the complaint. "This is absurd," she said. "You told the truth to a reporter, which is protected speech, and the emotional distress claim has no basis when she was the one harassing you, but we still have to respond. How much is this going to cost me?" "Probably a few thousand in legal fees, unless she drops it. But honestly, this might be good. We can file a counterclaim for malicious prosecution and abuse of process. And with the HOA audit showing financial irregularities, this is looking less like a neighborhood dispute and more like potential fraud." The audit results came back a month later. The accountant found over $30,000 in unauthorized expenses and questionable transfers over the 3 years Brenda had been president. Some of it might have been sloppy bookkeeping, but some appeared to be outright theft. The new board voted to file a report with the Duluth Police Department's Fraud Division. We also sent the findings to every homeowner in the neighborhood with a cover letter explaining what had been discovered. 2 days later, detectives showed up at Brenda's house. I watched from my window as they spent over an hour inside, then left carrying boxes of documents. The investigation took several months, but eventually, criminal charges were filed: theft by swindle and filing false reports. The case against me was dismissed long before Brenda's criminal trial began. The judge called her lawsuit frivolous and ordered her to pay my attorney's fees. Patricia's counterclaim was still pending, but Brenda's attorney was already making overtures about settling. The criminal trial happened in September. I attended several days of it, watching as prosecutors laid out a pattern of financial misconduct and abuse of authority. The most damaging testimony came from the City Code Enforcement Office, which provided records showing that Brenda had filed over 40 complaints against various homeowners in the past 3 years, and only 2 had resulted in actual violations being found. The jury convicted her on 3 counts of theft and 2 counts of filing false reports. The judge sentenced her to 2 years of probation, community service, and ordered her to pay restitution to the HOA for the money she had taken. By the time everything was settled, I had been living in my house for almost 18 months. The neighborhood felt different now. People were friendlier, more relaxed. The new HOA board operated with a light touch, handling only the basic functions we actually needed and staying out of people's private business. I still went snowmobiling in my backyard whenever the mood struck. No more fences blocked my path, and nobody called the cops. I had installed a small warming shelter in the back corner of my property where I could take a break during longer rides, and I had even cleared a trail that connected to the public trail system through my backwoods. One Saturday afternoon in February, Bill stopped by with his own snowmobile. "Feel like some company?" he asked. "Always. Where do you want to go? Let's just cruise the neighborhood trails. I want to see what you've done with that back section of your property." We spent the afternoon riding through the neighborhood's open spaces and then through my land. The sun was setting when we got back to my house, painting the snow in shades of orange and pink. "You know," Bill said as we pulled off our helmets, "a year ago I never would have imagined all this would happen. The board change, the criminal charges, all of it. Me neither. I just wanted to ride my snowmobile without someone calling the cops." "Well, you got that. Plus you helped fix a neighborhood that was broken. That's worth something." He was right. This had never been about the fence or the snowmobile or any of the specific incidents. It had been about standing up to a bully who had counted on people being too tired or too intimidated to fight back. The fact that I had fought and won meant something bigger than just my personal victory. "Thanks for backing me up," I said. "I couldn't have done it alone." That's the point. None of us could have done it alone, but together we made it happen. Bill left as the last light faded from the sky. I stood in my driveway for a moment looking at my house. It finally felt like home. Not because the building had changed, but because I had fought for the right to live here on my own terms. Inside, I made dinner and settled in to watch some television. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Brenda's attorney called. They want to settle the counterclaim for $15K. Thoughts? I typed back, "Let's do it. Time to close this chapter." She sent a thumbs up emoji. 3 months later, the settlement was finalized. I used part of the money to upgrade my snowmobile and donated the rest to a legal aid organization that helped homeowners dealing with HOA disputes. It seemed fitting. Spring came to Minnesota, melting the snow and revealing the muddy earth underneath. I spent weekends working in my yard, planting a garden for the back section where the fence used to be. Susan from down the street came by one Saturday with starter plants from her greenhouse. "Thought you might want these," she said, handing me trays of tomato seedlings. "I always plant too many." "Thanks. How's your blue door holding up?" she laughed. "Great. I'm thinking about painting my shutters purple next just because I can." That summer, the neighborhood had its first community barbecue in years. The new HOA board organized it but kept it simple. Grills in the park, everyone bringing their own food to cook. No rules or regulations or assigned time slots. Just neighbors hanging out. I brought burgers and beer and spent the evening talking to people I had barely known despite living among them for over a year. We laughed about the old board's ridiculous rules and made plans for future gatherings. Someone suggested a winter snowmobile rally, and I volunteered to help organize it. As the sun set and people started packing up, Bill walked over with a beer in hand. Not bad for a neighborhood that was supposedly falling apart without strict enforcement, huh? "Turns out people can actually govern themselves when you let them," I said. "Who would have thought?" He clinked his beer against mine. "Here's to property rights and common sense. And snowmobiling through your own damn backyard without getting arrested." We both laughed. The nightmare that had started with a simple ride through the snow had transformed into something bigger. A lesson in standing up for yourself, in community organizing, and in not letting bullies win just because fighting back is hard. I never saw Brenda again after the trial. I heard she moved out of the neighborhood that fall, selling her house quietly and relocating somewhere across town. I did not know if she learned anything from the experience, and honestly, I did not care. She was no longer my problem. My only concern was enjoying my property, being a good neighbor, and living the quiet life I had moved to Minnesota to find. And finally, after all the chaos and conflict, I had it. The snow came again that winter, thick and perfect. I took my snowmobile out on the first real storm of the season, carving through my backyard with no fences to block my path and no one to call the cops. The engine roared, the wind whipped past my helmet, and I felt completely, wonderfully free. This was what I had fought for. This was what mattered. Not winning against Brenda or changing the HOA board or any of the external victories, as satisfying as those had been. What mattered was reclaiming my right to exist in my own space on my own terms, without asking permission or apologizing for living my life. I rode until dark, then put the machine away and went inside to warm up. My house was cozy and quiet, exactly as a home should be. I made hot chocolate and sat by the window, watching the snow continue to fall outside. Somewhere in the neighborhood, other people were probably looking at the same storm and thinking about shoveling driveways or commuting to work in the morning. But all I could think about was how lucky I was to have land to ride on, a community that had come together when it mattered, and the freedom to use my property without someone trying to control every aspect of my life. The fence was gone. The HOA was fixed. The bully had faced consequences. And I was finally, truly home. That spring I got a letter from the new HOA board, which I now served on but had asked Gloria to take over as president since I preferred to stay behind the scenes. The letter thanked all homeowners for their patience during the transition and laid out a simple plan for the year ahead. Maintain the roads, organize a couple community events, and otherwise stay out of everyone's way. It was everything an HOA should be, and nothing more. I signed the acknowledgement form and mailed it back, grateful that the organization had returned to its proper purpose. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. I worked from home, rode my snowmobile in winter and my ATV in summer, and gradually got to know my neighbors as actual people rather than participants in an ongoing battle. The sense of community that had been crushed under Brenda's authoritarian rule slowly rebuilt itself, organic and genuine. One evening in late May, I was grilling on my back deck when I noticed someone walking up my driveway. It was Richard, Brenda's former vice president on the old board. I had not spoken to him since the special meeting that had voted them out. "Franklin," he called out nervously. "Do you have a minute?" I considered telling him to leave, but curiosity got the better of me. "Sure, want a beer?" He looked surprised but nodded. I grabbed 2 bottles from my cooler and met him at the edge of the deck. "What can I do for you, Richard?" He took a long drink before answering. "I wanted to apologize for everything that happened with Brenda and the old board. I should have stood up to her, but I just went along with it. That was wrong." I studied him for a moment. He looked sincere and tired in a way I recognized. "Why now?" "Because I've been thinking about it for months, about how we treated you and other people in the neighborhood. We told ourselves we were protecting property values, but really we were just on a power trip. At least Brenda was, and the rest of us enabled her." "Yeah, you did. I know. And I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I wanted you to hear it." We stood there in silence for a moment, drinking our beers. I thought about staying angry, about holding the grudge, but I was tired of anger. It had consumed too much of my time already. "Thanks for saying that," I finally said. "It does mean something. Not sure we'll ever be friends, but I appreciate you acknowledging it." Relief washed over his face. "That's more than I deserved. Anyway, I'll let you get back to your evening. Just wanted you to know." He set his half-finished beer on the deck railing and walked back down my driveway. I watched him go, feeling a strange sense of closure. The conflict really was over, not just legally or practically, but emotionally. The anger and stress that had defined my first year in this house had finally released its grip. I finished grilling my dinner and ate on the deck as the sun set. The backyard stretched out before me, open and mine. No fences, no disputes, no drama, just land and sky and peace. Later that night, I got a text from Jake. "Trail conditions are perfect tomorrow. You in?" I smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. Meet at sunrise. You got it." The next morning, I loaded my snowmobile onto the trailer and drove north into the wilderness. The trails were empty that early, just me and Jake and miles of untouched snow. We rode until noon, then stopped at a frozen lake to eat lunch and rest. "You seem different," Jake said, unwrapping a sandwich. "More relaxed or something?" "I feel different." Things finally settled down with the HOA mess. "That's good, man. You were pretty stressed there for a while." "Yeah, but it's done now. Brenda's gone, the board is fixed, and I can just live my life." That's all anyone wants, right? Just to be left alone to do their thing, you'd think. But some people can't help themselves. They see everyone else as a problem to be solved or controlled. Jake nodded. "Well, you solved the problem. Not everyone would have fought that hard. I didn't really have a choice. She wasn't going to stop until someone made her." We finished lunch and rode back as the afternoon sun turned the snow golden. By the time I got home, I was exhausted and happy, exactly how a day of snowmobiling should leave you. The years that followed were blissfully uneventful. The HOA continued to function quietly and efficiently under the new board's leadership. Neighborhood barbecues became annual traditions. Property values stayed stable, despite the lack of aggressive enforcement. I added a few improvements to my property. A larger garage to store my toys, a fire pit in the back for summer evenings, and eventually a small workshop where I could tinker with engines and build things. None of it required HOA approval, because the new board understood that homeowners had the right to improve their own property as long as they followed actual laws and regulations. The fence incident became neighborhood legend, a story told at parties and gatherings. Remember when Brenda called the cops on Frank for snowmobiling in his own yard? It was usually followed by laughter and head shaking, a reminder of how absurd things had gotten before we fixed them. I never forgot the lesson, though. Standing up to bullies works, but only if you're willing to document everything, follow procedures, and persist even when it is exhausting. Most people who abuse small amounts of power count on their victims giving up. The moment you prove you will not give up, the dynamic shifts. 5 years after I first moved to Duluth, I was finally living the life I had imagined when I bought the house. Quiet mornings working from home, weekends exploring the outdoors, evenings on my deck watching the sun set over my property. The dream was not just the house or the land, it was the freedom to enjoy them without interference. One winter evening, I was coming back from a ride when I saw a moving truck in front of the house 3 doors down. New neighbors. I stopped and introduced myself to the young couple who were unloading boxes. "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said. "I'm Frank Morrison. Let me know if you need anything." The woman smiled. "Thanks. We're excited to be here. Everyone says it's a great neighborhood." "It is now," I said. "The HOA is pretty low-key, which is how it should be. Just pay your dues and follow the actual bylaws and you'll be fine." "That's good to hear. We were worried after some of the stories we heard about HOAs. There used to be issues, but they got sorted out. You picked a good time to move in." As I walked back to my house, I felt a sense of pride in that statement. The neighborhood really was better now, not because we had stricter rules or tougher enforcement, but because we had removed the people who treated authority as a weapon. That night, I sat in my living room with a fire crackling in the fireplace, reflecting on the journey. It had started with such a simple thing, riding my snowmobile through my own backyard. That single act had triggered a chain of events that exposed corruption, united a community, and ultimately transformed how an entire neighborhood functioned. I had not set out to be a hero or a reformer. I just wanted to be left alone. But sometimes the only way to achieve peace is to fight for it first. The fight was over now. The peace was won. And finally, after all the chaos and conflict and legal battles, I had exactly what I had moved to Minnesota to find. A home where I could live life on my own terms in my own way without anyone trying to control me. The snow fell outside my window, steady and peaceful. Tomorrow I would wake up and maybe go for another ride. Or maybe I would stay inside and work on a project in my workshop. The choice was mine and mine alone. That freedom, hard-won and precious, was worth every moment of the fight.